Salam, hello, welcome back to Persica, Persian Things. Well, there's a lot going on in the world. One of the things that's happening at the moment, of course, in United Kingdom is the whole issue of Brexit, which really has divided this country in half. Our future is uncertain, um, but it's been interesting to have gone through the whole process, especially looking at the propaganda and the kind of rhetoric that politicians have employed around the whole issue of breaking away from the Union or staying with the Union. Propaganda, of course, is nothing new. It's been utilised very well throughout the 20th and into the 21st centuries, but of course it was alive and well in antiquity too. And today I want to take a look at some Persian propaganda and the ideology of the empire being better together. So, for today's topic, the rhetoric of empire, better together. One of my favourite films of recent years is The Death of Stalin, which I love for its really irreverent look at life within the Kremlin, in the highest echelons of political society in the USSR in the 1950s, around the death of the great dictator. One of the things I really love about the film is the casting of the different characters. Members of the Politburo have very different backgrounds. Some of them speak in American accents, some of them have North English accents, some of them speak like Cockneys. I love the diversity of the casting because for me it really reflects the reality of Stalin's Russia. Because we have to concede, after all, that the Soviet Union was one of the biggest empires the world has seen. Around about 1936, it dominated a continent. And in his publicity, Stalin really played on that. The ethnic diversity that made up his own empire was something to be proud of. Stalin had to think very carefully about the message he sent out, about the unity of the USSR. Given that it was made up of such diverse ethnicities, all of these people needed to be drawn together, and the propaganda of the USSR under the Stalinist regime certainly highlighted that successfully. In its day, the Achaemenid Empire was the biggest land empire on earth. Before the conquest of Alexander, it was the biggest the world had ever seen. Now, of course, in reality, that empire was created through brute force, through military conquest. We have to concede that. Here we see a seal of Persians defeating nomads from the east, probably Iranian speakers, who occupied the area of Parthia or Scythia. The empire was built through military conquest, and the Persians celebrated that often in scenes like this, carved onto small seals. For the truth of the matter is, no matter how hard you look, the imperial large-scale art of ancient Iran, such as at Persepolis, does not show warfare and does not show conquest. Peace and harmony are constantly expressed in the royal, official propaganda of the empire. Courtiers conversing, touching one another in comradeship and friendship, and not infrequently at Persepolis we see scenes of hand-holding, a gesture which of course is to do with friendship, support, loyalty and togetherness. This is clear propaganda. For us, the excellent Achaemenid historian Margaret Coolroot has written, "The world is at peace on the walls of Persepolis as it never was in actuality. While news of the Persian sack of Miletus was striking terror into the Greek soul, artisans from near and far were creating dreams in stone for Darius." This is what we have to concede is going on in the imagery of Persepolis. Dreams in stone. In other words, propaganda. And what is the message of that propaganda? Well, just as we have under Stalin and the USSR, that message is that the empire is better when it works together. Like Stalin's empire, the Achaemenid Empire was made up of very diverse peoples. Egyptians, Libyans, Greeks, Cappadocians, Syrians, Scatagidians, Aryans, Indians, and of course Persians themselves. All of these people had a space in the rhetoric of the empire. At Persepolis of the Apadana, two staircases, the north and the east, represent this idea coherently. The northern staircase is now badly weathered, but a reconstruction, in glorious technicolor, shows people from different parts of the empire bringing their tribute, joyfully as it were, to the great king, perhaps at Nowruz, the New Year celebrations held in March. Together, wearing different clothing, representing their different ethnicities, they bring the goods of the empire. The eastern staircase is better preserved, and although it's lost its colour, shows these people being brought together as though in harmony, often being led by a Persian whom you can see holding hands with the first delegate, meeting their king and presenting them their gifts. Now it must be recognised that the layout of the staircase is not haphazard. Different strata of the staircase, from high to low, represent the different peoples of the empire. Those at the top of the stairs, the Medes, the Elamites, represent peoples who are closer to the centre of Persia, whereas those down the far end of the staircase, such as the Ethiopians and people from Somalia, represent those who are furthest away. This corresponds with the kind of textual imagery we have of the empire too. On, for instance, an inscription from Persepolis, Darius the Great notes how Persia is the centre of the empire, and he lists his empire by the east and then by the west. This again is emphasised in another text found at Persepolis, where Persia is seen to be the very centre of the universe. The four corners of the universe co-align at Persia. The representations on the Apadana staircases therefore depict the ideology of the physical space of the empire. The closer one is, in terms of physical geography, to Persia, the higher position one gets on the staircase itself. The whole geography of the empire is mapped out in these ethnic terms. It put me in mind of a poster created for the British Empire about 1942, where once again you see this idea of the British Empire laid out by its ethnic inhabitants. Those from India and Africa are at the back of the poster, and yet the whole feeling is togetherness, fighting together. Similarly, the Indians and the Ethiopians find themselves at the back of the staircase. But this is in no way disparaging. The Indian and the Ethiopian are as integral to the empire as the Elamite or the Mede. That idea of harmony, of coming together, is expressed in a curious pose, the so-called Atlas pose, where members of the empire, different ethnic types wearing distinct ethnic costume, uphold the great king's throne, supporting the empire itself. A piece of rhetoric on Darius's tomb at Rustam supports that. If now you shall think, how many are the countries that King Darius held, look at the sculptures of those who bear the throne, then you shall know, then shall it become known to you, the spear of a Persian man has gone forth far. When the Hollywood movie 300 used this motif of the Atlas pose, they tried to represent it as oppressive, a weight which bear down upon the peoples of the empire. But how wrong they were in depicting it that way. Nothing could be further from the truth. On the statue of Darius, discovered at Susa, we see peoples of the empire dressed in national costume, named in the cartouches, gently supporting the king who walks above them. It is a representation of the togetherness of empire, of Pax Persiana, the Persian peace. For as Margaret Coleroot wrote, a vision of an imperial cosmos where the four quarters of the world sing harmonious praises to the power of the great king. This is propaganda, but it is very effective, and it worked. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Something to think on. Plus ça change. Nothing changes, huh? Okay, well, until next time, I wish you Khoda Hafez. Goodbye for now.